listeners. Welcome to Inside TechComm with your host, Zohra Mutabana. In Season 4, I hope to bring to you different perspectives and interests that intersect with our field. Let's get started. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Inside TechComm with Zohra Mutabana. Today, I'm having my best friend, Shaughn Kern, on the show, and I pick his brains all the time. He and I work together, and he is a nerd, if I'm using it in the right context. He is super nerdy, and he and I were talking about ChatGPT. What else, right? And he started sharing all these cool things with me, and I'm like, dude, you have to get on my show. And I'm honored to have my dear friend, Shaughn Kern, with me here today. Hey, Shaughn, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Zora, and thank you so much for that introduction. I do really take the term nerd as a badge of endearment and something that I strive to earn and wear proudly. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm so honored to have you. So, Shaughn, tell us a little about yourself.
I have a bachelor's and master's of science in technical communication, with most of my focus being on software documentation, UX, and slideshow design. I am a bit of a computer nerd and a word nerd, so I find it to be a fun intersection. And in doing so, a lot of times I'm looking for new tools and new ways to reduce my own workload and make my work more accurate, more targeted.
And we will do a deep dive into that. But tell us, you and I worked on some really interesting projects. And one of the reasons why I love collaborating with you is you're such a coding geek, or at least from where I'm sitting and watching you do stuff. So tell us how your background in TechCom has kind of lent to your passion for coding, and what have you done to become the scripter that you are today?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have earned the scripting or coding geek title quite yet, but I am certainly an amateur coder, particularly with regards to finding things that make my life as a technical communicator easier. And it's funny because my first real life TechCom gig was about 15 years ago at a research institute. They had built an internal toolkit of something like 1,000 scripts in various languages, and the only documentation they had was the command line help statements. My job was move all of that content from the command line help statements into a Confluence wiki, and then take that same content and create a user guide in Microsoft Word. And I think I had 3 months for this project, maybe 4. Anyways, it was an absolutely insurmountable task to do manually, especially within that time frame. So I asked
Of
the
course.
developers, like, how do I even begin here? And they're like, you're going to have to use regular expressions, and you're going to have to use Python, and you have to use some Bash. And I'm like, I think you hired the wrong person. It's like, but I'm going to try and figure this out just the same. And I did it. It was, week after week of figuring out how to use Python and Bash and macros in Microsoft Word, and all of these more technical elements that are available to tech writers, but maybe not taught in a traditional curriculum. They're not usually not listed on any sort of application to a tech writing position. But what stuck with me the most is once you know that this technology is out there, that you have these tools to help you, that can vastly simplify both removing bottlenecks from your job functions and automating the more mundane parts of your work. You can reapply those. And to this day, I still use a lot of the same tricks I learned from that 3-month, 4-month gig. And I use that in the same projects as at Blackbaud as I did with previous companies, and it's been working great.
I mean, definitely, as I've shadowed you, I've seen how you kind of have applied some of the tricks that you've learned before to your new role. The reason I asked this question, Shaughn, is one, I personally believe that as we grow in our careers, we have to pivot, right? Constantly to keep our skills, to stay current and to stay relevant. But the coding thing can sometimes be intimidating for many technical writers.
Oh, yeah.
And, right? The purpose in asking this question to you is, what advice would you give to a technical writer who has absolutely no experience in coding? What could be the simplest way to start somewhere?
I would say just learning regular expressions and learning how to open a file in Python and find a chunk of text, a string that's maybe like our most recent collaborative project, the alt text script, where you and I set up a script that basically looks through all the HTML files and says, okay, find all instances of an image tag and give me a list of the ones that do not have, an alt equals quotation marks. And so it involves a little bit of knowing regular expressions, involves a little bit of knowing how to open a file and put over into a new file. From there, you start to realize, oh, okay, this is just a matter of cracking open a file, finding a type of string, maybe changing that string, and then moving any content that you want into basically an output file or files.
So that's a simple enough example that is not insurmountable, that is not intimidating. And of course, I guess Google is your best friend, right?
No, I think at this point, ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, thank you. Yes.
I would have said, and I'm not pandering to the subject of this show because, I spend a ton of time on Stack Overflow just trying to find snippets of code. And it's like, okay, does this work? I think as writers, we have Google for a very long time. I think software engineers and developers have had Stack Overflow. That's been like one of their go-to resources. And so something like that, just the basic of saying, okay, we'll find every instance of passive voice and put that line of code in the file into a text document.
Oh,
that
that's
can
cool.
be helpful. That could be helpful and simple for just exploring how to write things in Python, how to open files. But you can get far enough into that to where we can do things like say, okay, I want you to convert all of our all of our Madcap Flare documentation into Markdown, or all of our, Adobe FrameMaker data documentation into lightweight data. So once you're able to crack open files and manipulate content and put them out in whatever file you want, your ability to migrate legacy content formats into a new style or clean up legacy content becomes something where, again, if you had 3 months to do it manually, there's no way you're going to pull that off.
Yeah.
But if you have the right script for it, you can do that with hypothetically any amount of content in a couple minutes.
Excellent examples. I would agree that they're simple enough, but they can really pay off, starting small and experimenting. So, Shaughn, I've been experimenting with Python. I haven't told you that. But since I started shadowing you, I've been writing small scripts and I've been doing exactly the examples you mentioned to find patterns. I just introduced dumb patterns into a file and I tried to read that to see if it picked it up. And it did. So good examples there. And I feel so motivated working with you and just shadowing you. So thank you for that, buddy. We talked about ChatGPT, right? And before I do a deep dive into that, this was sort of the precursor to that. You've been doing coding. What do you think about ChatGPT from your perspective? Is it going to replace us?
No, absolutely not. The first thing I asked of it was, I don't remember if it was trying to find a movie for my daughter. She was like, I want to see a superhero movie and I want it to be scary and the superhero has to be a girl. And I was like, okay, I could Google that and sort through all of the results and try and figure it out. And ChatGPT gave me a really simple, just here's a list of 6 movies that would be appropriate for your 6-year-old. Here's the descriptions. Here's why we think it would be appropriate. I was like, that's pretty cool. I should probably say that I'm relatively late to the ChatGPT game. I am not someone who's interested in having any new piece of technology for the sake of having it. I want to know that it is going to give me practical value. I don't need Alexa to turn the lights on in my house, and I don't know what the implications of that even are. So when you hear people saying, oh, ChatGPT is a singularity and the robots have taken over, Skynet has arrived, it's like, probably not. And when you have people say, this is the most powerful tool ever invented, it's going to put people out of business because it's so powerful. When you hear heated sides of both arguments, it's like, I'm going to wait for this to die down and check this out from a practical standpoint. I love it. I think it's an incredible tool. I think your average person in the tech industry right now is going to have, at any given time in their workday, an email client, messaging client, maybe Stack Overflow, maybe Google. ChatGPT is going to be the next tool on our computer that is just open at all times of the day. And it's because Whereas search engines help you gather information, ChatGPT, it gathers it and aggregates it and transforms that information in a novel way that is eerily similar to what we do as technical writers, but it cannot do it better than us. And I guess once we get in some of the case studies I've looked at, I could start with those next because,
Yes.
my first experience looking at this is like, oh, this is pretty smart. And the second question I typed in ChatGPT was, as tech writers, many of our projects start with research, whether that is us having to research original content ourselves or get content from subject matter experts. Now,
Right.
if we get writer's block or we're not able to access such a subject matter expert, you can't start your project.
Yep.
So right after I typed in my first question to GPT, I realized it's like, wait a minute, I've got this bottleneck going on right now. So I'm supposed to be documenting some internal DevOps processes. The colleague that we're supposed to interview for the information is absolutely the best in the company at this sort of thing. He knows his stuff up and down. But because he's so smart and so in demand, his calendar was literally booked 2 weeks out. The normal workflow for tech writers here would be either A, I start looking through the existing documentation on this particular DevOps workflow, or I wait until we can get this DevOps person in the room.
Right.
And it was going to take 2 weeks. And I was like, well, I got this little chat thing open right here. So I type in, it's like, how do you build this? And, this infrastructure. I can't go into specifics here. It is a third-party DevOps system. And it spit out 300 words. I typed in 2 follow-up questions. Each one was another 100-word response. Took 20 minutes to parse that down to about 150 words.
Cool.
And then sent that to the subject matter expert and said, hey, I know you're super slammed right now. So rather than you trying to come up with something to send to me yourself, maybe just when you get the chance, go through this, review it for accuracy. And we can use that as a starting point when we do have the chance to meet. And it worked out pretty well. And then I realized, wait a minute, I just shaved 2 weeks off of what would have been the turnaround time for me to just get started on this.
That's pretty neat. Now, in this case, there was information out there already available about this third-party tool.
Yes.
Right? So, and ChatGPT had access to that data. But
absolutely.
The fact that you were able to use it to your advantage is an example of how you can partner with this quote unquote tool.
Well, I was also able to take the edited version of the documentation that I worked on and combine that with some existing internal documentation specific to our company that I had found. Because you don't want to go around documenting someone else's software. You want to document how to use their software within your institution.
Exactly.
So I was able to find internal documentation and incorporate that as well.
So this is where human ingenuity, I think from my takeaway from this example is, at the end of the day, nothing can replace human ingenuity.
Yeah, there was a lot of text to clean up because, as you had pointed out, this was an existing product from another company that it was getting the documentation from. So depending on how well that company documents their product, that's, I think, going to inform how well ChatGPT documents it for you.
I think that's a very important point. I want to kind of elaborate on that. The fact that the data that is available to ChatGPT is the data that has been created by a human. And as it's learning, it is learning from existing data, at least at this point in time.
Precisely. And as tech writers, one of the reasons I say is we're not going anywhere anytime soon. What ChatGPT is not going to put us out of a job is because, one, it still needs us to edit this stuff. And two, as tech writers, we're oftentimes documenting brand new technology and
exactly.
It doesn't exist anywhere else.
It doesn't exist anywhere
else. So both
else,
the components of our jobs where we create new content and parts of our jobs where we refine old content, we are still quite relevant.
Thank you. I really like that take. And I do see it that way as well. I had somebody comment on my post on LinkedIn. It was like a doomsday sort of a scenario for them. And I think there is a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of panic from what I can sense. And I don't know if this person who responded to my post on LinkedIn was a technical writer or not, but they're like, oh my God, this is just going to replace us and it's going to be the bane of our existence. And I'm thinking, are we creating unnecessary anxiety with that approach and that mindset?
I think it's absolutely okay to be cautious about this sort of thing. One of the earlier things that I read or listened to, I'll have to get you her name. I forget the name. She did a really cool little YouTube video, things that tech writers can use ChatGPT for. She compared it to what happens with translation devices, where all of a sudden you had the field of translation. We hadn't cracked the code yet. You still needed a person to do good translation from one language to another. But once the technology hit like good enough, a lot of that was automated. A lot of
Yeah.
it was just, it's like, well, we could either hire a full-time translator or we could just get something that's fairly close with this automated system. So I do think a company could say, well, we don't feel like hiring a tech writer, so we're just going to have our POs put their stuff into ChatGPT. And they'd get something that's better than if you didn't have a tech writer at all. But it's not going to be good as an actual tech writer. I would say my advice to anyone that thinks that their job is going to be taken by the system, go in and play around with it, but just play around with it in terms of the area of your work that is the where you're the most valuable. So for example, the scripting and programming that I do to build utilities to make my day a little bit easier, that's important to my job. That's not what companies hire me to do. ChatGPT can definitely outcode me, but I know that it cannot outwrite me. I know that it cannot out-edit me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think ChatGPT can outcode a professional software engineer or developer, but I think it can probably out-edit them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
going to prop up the areas where we're not experts. And it means that whatever domain of expertise that we're in, we're going to really have to double down on it. And we better darn well be passionate about it, right? Because
Great advice.
otherwise, like you said, we're not going to be able to keep our competitive edge and we're not going to be ahead of this technology come Chat GPT 5 or 6.
Great advice, great insight, and a great, I think, great perspective there, Shaughn. Absolutely. I think I agree with you. So that kind of naturally segues into my next question. You have done some cool stuff at work with ChatGPT. If you can share those examples, can you share some interesting examples? Because I thought as you and I were talking about it the other day, I thought, hey, you know what? Technical writers out there who are not thinking of how to leverage ChatGPT as a tool can start thinking about those. And some of the examples that you shared with me kind of just led me down that path.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, why don't you just jump in and share those cool examples with me?
I mean, my favorite example so far, and I think it's the one where it's my favorite because I had the highest aspirations to it, but it was the most lessons learned. So it was maybe the fourth or fifth thing I typed in ChatGPT. It's like, can you read this URL to me? And it was the release notes for one of the products that I work on. And it said, sure. And it gave the content. And it's like, this is not the right content. And I was like, what's going on here? And it turns out like ChatGPT cannot read live websites. It was reading a website from a couple years ago, which I think a lot of people that are roughly familiar with the engine, they understand that now. It's not reading live websites. It just somehow knows everything that was on the internet 3 years ago or whatever it is. And
Yeah,
so
I think 2021. That's interesting. So you just randomly went and typed a URL and asked ChatGPT to read that.
I just went into it with a project and was like, let's see how much it can help me. It's like, okay, so you can't read live websites, so that's out. And it's like, okay, well, what happens if I take this raw pseudo HTML file from my Madcap Flare project and just paste that right in there? Sometimes I had success with that, sometimes I didn't. But it was like, okay, read the content in this HTML and then edit it. And it could do that, but I also need, before and after of the plain text so that I can diff them and figure out what exactly ChatGPT changed because I don't trust it enough yet to just give it content and then Control C, Control V that into a document. That's not safe at this point. So then it became, okay, well, you can't upload a file directly. So now I'm pasting code and it doesn't like HTML. Once you get past 70 to 90 lines, there's a chance that it will choke. And then it's okay, well, if I paste in the HTML, can you convert that to Markdown? And then I take the Markdown code and use that for the original, then ask it to edit the content in the Markdown for clarity and grammar and the style of technical writing, get new Markdown and compare that. And so essentially, I'm trying to throw my content at it in as many ways as possible to figure out what type of content it works the best with and to be able to track the various edits that it's making.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my conclusion at the end of the day is drop it in there, have it convert to Markdown, then convert it back. The process itself was not worth it. The edits that it provided, and I cycled my entire Flare project through it. So about 80 topics, it's a small project. Sometimes it picked up really good examples. A lot of times it introduced passive voice. A lot of times it overwrote we have an internal style guide at our company. So it would change bolding or italics or, switch around things as it saw fit. And then one time it just took the Markdown and tried to make it into a Python script.
Just randomly.
Really random. And there was no discussion of Python in any of our discussions.
Oh, okay.
So it just a complete glitch in the matrix. In very few occasions did it introduce anything that was completely wrong. I would say that it offered very diminishing returns on editing content that I worked on recently. However, working on a product that we had acquired from another company, there was some very old content that it saw and just marked right up. And this was good because it was like on the landing page or some of the most frequently visited pages of our product, where everyone has been staring at the product description and the content on that page for so long that no one's thought to edit it in many years. People just kind of glaze over it. So I think it's great if you're going to use it to edit legacy content that was written by someone that maybe wasn't a technical writer or was from a different company. In terms of having it edit my own writing, and not because, I'm like, I can out John Henry this machine here. I would take any tech writer at Blackbaud to edit my content before ChatGPT, hands down. Will it find, random things here and there? Yes. Is it worth cycling an entire Flare project through there? Probably not until there's a more efficient way of doing it. And I don't know if I have found what I would consider an efficient way yet. Getting closer.
Okay. So what kind of prompts did you provide, Shaughn? You went through a pretty big process to get to discover whatever one, and all that you've shared so far. But just as an example, can you, based on what you've shared with us, what kind of prompts did you give with your content to benefit from ChatGPT's feedback or edits?
Your question is perfect because it addresses the area that I got burned the most in this Flare project. And that is, if you know how to use ChatGPT, you can get content in a code editor that has syntax highlighting, and you can get it in tabular format. You have to specify it. But I would say, for example, okay, convert the following HTML to Markdown, ignoring any madcap elements, because madcap Flare adds additional proprietary elements to help their software process HTML better. When I didn't tell it to ignore the madcap elements, it says, this is not HTML, this is XML, and I cannot read it, which is true.
Right.
Which is true. But I was able to get it to read madcap Flare content, and it did somewhat fine with that. And it was like, convert this to Markdown. Then it would just give the content. And it's like, this isn't Markdown. And that's literally what I typed. I go, this isn't Markdown. Then it says, oh, yes, here, let me display this for you in a code editor with the raw Markdown. It's like perfect. And then the next time I'm dropping in HTML to it, I go, okay, convert the following HTML to Markdown, ignoring any madcap elements, display the full Markdown syntax in your code widget. Wouldn't do it. Every time I had to have a follow-up question that says, display this in a code widget. So This is not something where you can put in a single line and have it do everything that you want to. It has to be iterative. You have to do follow-up questions. Now, when I tried the same thing in ChatGPT 4, it did everything right away perfectly.
Oh, it did.
Yes, it takes a lot longer, and both ChatGPT 3.5, which is currently the most recent version, and ChatGPT 4, if you're dropping in an HTML file that's, depending on the complexity, 100 lines or so, it's going to choke on it. And by choke, I mean it might get to line 70 the one time, it might get to line 80 the next time, it might get to line 60 the next time. So there is a lot of treating this as an iterative process that has to happen.
Okay. So if somebody is, a lone writer and is trying to figure out, hey, how do I put ChatGPT to my advantage? Is there anything that you can recommend them from this exercise that, hey, maybe there are XYZ things that ChatGPT could help you with?
Absolutely. I mean, just as a research assistant for getting the crappy first draft out of the way.
Okay.
I think most tech writers, well, I might be wrong here. I think tech writers that have a healthy ego understand that the first piece of content they put together, it's not going to be great. And that's fine because we can figure out and edit as many times as we want. But getting that first chunk out there and going through whether it's Stack Overflow or a bunch of Google hits, I mean, like, oh, this is an ad. I have to drop my email to receive a white paper to access this information. It's a great place to start for that original research and just getting a chunk of content to parse down and hopefully figure out a complex concept right off the bat. For coding, something that I had not considered, not only does it write, from my perspective, pretty decent code, it comments all of its code. And our colleague Bob Costanzo has been throwing his scripts in there and saying, yeah, write comments for my code. And it's like, how brilliant is that? And then meanwhile, you've been using it for translation purposes, which of course I had never thought of. So I think aside from generating content, getting over writer's block or using it to comment some code or that, just be creative and play around with it. If you're willing to say, I want to see how this tool works for my project, I think there's a lot to be learned no matter what you're working on. And I really look forward to hearing from other tech writers in terms of what they're using this for.
Yeah, I think this is a great period for us to really get experimental with it, right? And have fun, really, more than anything at this point, and not feel intimidated that this is going to replace us. That's for another day. I'm going to leave that worry for another day and have fun with it while it's accessible to us right now.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think very soon it's going to become a paid subscription thing, and we may not have access to it for us to experiment. So I think it's great that writers such as you are experimenting with it and discovering some new ways, model ways. That brings up my next question for you. And I think you mentioned this, is you were going to throw our style guide at it and do something cool with it.
Well, I don't know if that's within my scope of abilities. I would really like to. One of the things that I have enjoyed the most is, if you can't find what you're looking for on Google, you can't just say, Google, help me figure you out. With ChatGPT, I typed in, okay, so what do I do if I want to give you content and have you format it and edit it for APA, MLA, Chicago, anything like that? And it's like, I can handle most style guides. And it's like, what about an internal style guide for a company, not a widely known one? And it's like, okay, it's like you can do that through the chat interface, but it's going to be really loose paraphrasing, by the way. ChatGPT is trained to give much better responses than I am, much more articulate. ChatGPT basically said, you can do it through the usual chat interface, but it's going to be very difficult and potentially inaccurate. Your best bet is to feed it through our API.
Okay.
And that's the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to get myself an API key. I don't know if I'm going to get to the point of building my own style guide through it.
But you've tried something at the end of the day,
Hmm.
right?
And I think the biggest thing I learned there is ChatGPT understands its own constraints. And if you ask it if it can do something, or if it's giving you a hard time, say, how do I get you to do this? It's really helpful in that regard. And it takes a weird type of creative thinking that we've not really developed with search engines. Search engines, you try and type in a string and you click enter. If it doesn't work,
Yeah.
try again, you switch a couple of words around. Whereas ChatGPT is iteratively building on what you're doing.
Very true. I almost felt like I was having a conversation with it. It's like a two-way street. With
Mm-hmm.
a search engine, it's a one-way street. And frustration can build up very quickly.
So Zora, to your point about, this has to be a conversation, it's not Google. I think this is a new type of, you brought up the term prompt engineering, which thank you for that on your last episode, because I didn't know what the heck it meant. But prompt engineering is basically, do you know how to use this in a way that's not Google? And one of the things I'm trying to use it as is more like Wikipedia. You know how you go on those Wikipedia, like you just click, 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 and eventually you wind up somewhere completely different.
Yep.
It wasn't necessarily what you set out to do, but you sure learned a whole lot getting there.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I'm starting to look at it. And that's happened with some of the tech com stuff that I've discussed, where it's like, oh, how do you work with Markdown? Can I do this with your API? How much does your API cost? Well, what is a token? So having those conversations where you're drilling down more and more, I think is a better way to interact than, the Google one-off. Can I get what I need at the top of the search engine? And I think by treating it that way, you're less likely to take whatever ChatGPT spits out and just roll with it. And so last week was my wife's birthday. We're in the middle of selling a house. We're super busy. We've got house showings. We're both still working. I was like, what do you want for your birthday dinner? She's like, anything involving smoked salmon. And it's like, okay, well, that's one of my favorite ingredients. And she's like, not the pate. It's like, all right, well, there goes my ace in the hole there. And so I was like, okay, ChatGPT, what are some cultures that use smoked salmon as a primary component of dishes? And it spits out some stuff. I was like, okay, let's figure out a salad. And I work with it to build a salad. And I was like, what are some dressings that would go off this salad? And they did one, and it was sour cream and horseradish based, and one that was Dijon mustard, lemon, and sour cream based. And at that point, it's like, this is someone's birthday dinner, specifically my wife's birthday dinner. It feels like I'm cheating at this point. So it's like, you know what? We're going to end the chat here. I'm going to look at these dressings. I'm going to combine them. I'm going to change them because, I do have the ability to cook and think on my own. So I very much think that ChatGPT, whether it's for the professional workplace or just stuff around your house, you can use it for a lot of really cool things. Great place to start, bad place to stop, especially if you're doing
Oh,
something where you have personal talents that supersede this chat engine and something where you want it to be more meaningful.
very interesting examples. Shaughn, thank you for sharing something so personal with us. We really appreciate it. But it's like you said, use it smartly, but don't stop with it. I don't know where I read this in some book. The word that came to my mind was wayfinding, where you're trying to find something and the path you follow to get to it, you may not end up where you wanted to be, but you eventually land somewhere where it's better than not having landed anywhere at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's a wonderful way of putting it. If you ever do a Google search and you see like the list of like the 10 questions that have been asked and how banal and nonsensical those questions are, it's the opposite. I'm starting to look at prompt engineering as the opposite of the Ask Yahoo or Ask Google. I don't know what those categories are called, but where it's like, no, you can't get pregnant from that. Where did you go to school? Who asked this question? Who asked this question so many times that it became a top hit in Google? It's being the opposite of the people that ask the bad questions in Google.
Oh, interesting perspective again there, Shaughn. I agree. Another thing that I'm going to be trying out actually right after this interview, something that I wanted to share with you is a very dear family member of mine is looking to pivot their career. And based on their skills, they're like, I can either go to a career coach, which they will, but just as a starting point, just as a discovery, what kind of careers can I look at or start talking about? And when I go to the career coach, I'm like, this is what I want and how can I make it there? But it's kind of being more prepared and informed in their career choices that they're going to make. They are thinking of throwing their resume at ChatGPT and asking, based on my skills, what career options can I have? So that's something that they want my help with. And that's something that I'm going to try. I haven't tried that yet, but
We're doing a lateral movement career wise because we don't always know where the fine overlaps are with our current roles. And that's brilliant. And it's great that they are also going to a professional career course afterwards because, again, this robot cannot it's a language model. The language model cannot outperform a lot of professionals yet. But at the same time, if they look at all the stuff that ChatGPT spits out and they know immediately, like, I don't want this one, I don't want this one. What even is this career? No, that could help them have a more focused conversation and get the most out of the professional career guidance.
yeah, that's what we are expecting. And I think to a large extent, that's how the story will pan out. But this kind of brings us back to the point where use it for your research, use it to edit, but don't make it the end all of your work, right? Use it as a means and as an aid, really, but nothing more than that. So this has been a fantastic discussion, Shaughn. I have enjoyed picking your brains as always. And thank you for your
so much,
time on a
Zora.
Sunday afternoon while you're in the midst of a storm trying to manage everything else.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And Zora, I am sincerely looking forward to whatever we collaborate on next with the ChatGPT stuff at work. This is a fun time to be in the discipline, and I think it will continue to be.
Yes, and I'm just going to add to that. And it's a fun time for me to be picking your brains. Thank you for being my buddy and for helping me with everything that I want to learn. I'm always curious, and it's people like you that make it fun for me. So thank you.
I'm very flattered, and you are very.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, Shaughn, whatever is left of it. And I'll see you on the other side at work tomorrow.
Bye, Zora.
Bye, Shaughn. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app, such as Google, Apple, or Spotify. For the latest on my show, follow me on LinkedIn or visit me at www.insidetechcomm.show. Catch you on another episode.